Now, Washington Watch viewers and listeners will remember we've recently covered the case of Grant Park Christian Academy. It's a Florida school that was denied funding for its meal programs under the new Biden administration guidelines for Title IX. And that was due to the school's refusal to comply with a radical expansion of the definition of sex to include sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, our friends at Alliance Defending Freedom filed a lawsuit on behalf of Grant Park Christian, and the Department of Agriculture quickly notified them that their religious exemption was being granted. Now, the United States Department of Agriculture has determined it will not require any religious schools to follow the new Title IX regulations. Here to talk about what this means for religious schools and other religious institutions is ADF's Director of the Center for Religious Schools and Senior Counsel for Government Affairs, Greg Baylor. Greg, good to see you today.
Good to see you, Joseph.
Now, I tried to provide a little background on this case. Any details I missed that are important?
Well, the USDA is not the agency that normally enforces Title IX, which, of course, is a string on federal money that says recipients, schools can't, quote, discriminate on the basis of sex. Normally, that's the Department of Education. So I think the USDA may not have anticipated all the consequences of what they were doing. And when we were probing them and asking them how they were going to handle the enforcement of Title IX, they really didn't know. We tried very hard before we filed the litigation to get them to provide us clear answers about how they would handle religious schools that can't comply because of their religious convictions with the pretty dramatic and radical way that they understand sex as that word appears in Title IX. So there was, I think, a little bit of confusion inside the administration, but at the end of the day, they did the right thing. Now they just need to communicate with other states besides Florida and tell them not to exclude religious schools from the program because they want to adhere to their religious convictions.
And that leads me to my next question is how broad or narrow is this announcement? Does this exempt all religious institutions, just religious schools, just religious primary schools? Who does this apply to?
Yeah, it applies to religious schools that get federal financial assistance. Title IX doesn't just apply to everybody. It only applies to schools that get money from the federal government. And of course, almost all colleges and universities receive funds from the federal government in the form of federal student aid. When it comes to K through 12 schools, a much smaller percentage, the vast minority of K through 12 schools get any kind of federal financial assistance. In the case of Grant Park and the other schools that we are concerned with in the USDA context, the money that they're getting from the federal government is National School Lunch Program funds. These, of course, are funds that are made available to economically disadvantaged students and their families so that they can get a free hot lunch at school. So it's only that subset of schools that participate in the National School Lunch Program. Now, what exemption do they get? They don't get a blanket exemption from Title IX. They only get an exemption from those pieces of it that conflict with their religious convictions, their religious tenets. And USDA was unclear at the beginning about, well, how do you invoke that exemption? Do you need to apply for it? Do you need to comply with these radical demands of Title IX while USDA takes its time and assesses whether you're entitled to the exemption? That was really the controversy that was going on. And we're thankful that the USDA made this announcement saying, look, you don't have to apply for the exemption. If you're a religious school, you're entitled to it. You can continue to hold and believe that men are men, that women are women, that boys are boys and girls are girls without giving up these critical funds to help feed poor children.
We're speaking with Greg Baylor from the Alliance Defending Freedom. And Greg, one of the concerns in recent years as religious freedom has continued to be assaulted in the context of higher education is that Christian universities who hold these positions risk losing student aid if they, for example, do not allow same-sex couples in their married student housing. Does this rule, and again, this is the Department of Agriculture, but how broad is this? Would this help universities that potentially felt that threat?
Well, I think they were already in good shape. Interestingly enough, during the Trump administration, his Department of Education clarified the precise question that USDA was confused about. And again, that question was, look, there's this exemption that exists. There's this process that the Department of Education created under which a school could not apply for the exemption, but simply get a verification, get an assurance from the department that they possess this exemption. And that had been the practice of the department back, from the beginning, really in the 1980s. And there was some concern under the Obama administration that it was somehow necessary to go through this process. And the Trump administration put a stop to that and adopted a formal regulation that says, look, you don't have to, quote, apply for this exemption. You possess it. Right. You can assert it. The reason this is important is because under the Obama administration, when there was the first time we saw Title IX get interpreted to reach gender identity and sexual orientation, a lot of colleges and universities communicated with the department, asked them for assurance that they possessed the exemption. And folks who oppose religious liberty, LGBT rights activists, were sending FOIA requests to the federal government and compiling shame lists in which they were trying to badmouth these institutions. So the Department of Education got it right. The USDA never changed that regulation the way that the Department of Education did, and that's why we ended up with this problem.
Greg, final question for you. The context here is school lunch programs, and there was this sense that we're going to defund school lunch programs for needy kids if you don't share our beliefs about boys being able to become girls. Is this really the administration becoming tolerant of religious freedom, or did they not want to look like bullies for defunding lunch programs?
Yeah, I think it's very much the latter. I mean, we know where their priorities lie. I mean, this is an administration that supports the Equality Act, which would do away with all of this and impose these obligations on religious schools without any opportunity to get an exemption. So I think they understood the optics of it and the PR of it, and that's probably a big reason why they backed down.
Greg Baylor from the Alliance Defending Freedom, we appreciate you and all that you guys do for us. Thanks for being with us today.
You bet. Likewise, Joseph. Take care.